Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Nikon Creators Hour. I am your host, Mike Corrado. I've been with Nikon for over 35 years and taking pictures for 40 years. And we've been doing these really great conversations and interviews with some really epic photographers. And today we have Lisa Zunzanyika with us from Atlanta. How you doing, Lisa?
Fantastic, Mike. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the Creators Hour, and thank you for putting together a collection of images for us to talk about and give us the great backstories on throughout the journey of your career. I certainly want to brag on you. You are a former combat photographer and military photographer of the year. You are running your own business now, Simply Z Imagery, and I want to talk about all of that over the next hour, if you don't mind.
Fantastic. Love to.
Yeah, it's great to see you, and you and I go way back decades ago when we met for the very first time at a military workshop that I was there as a Nikon rep, and you were there as one of the students, I believe, with
correct.
The two Kens, Ken Hackman and Ken Cook, and
Yes.
One of our dear friends, Russ Egner from the Navy way back when, and it's been a while.
It has been. It has been. That was, oh my gosh, I heard. It's a struggle to put a date to it. What, back in the 90s? And then, of course, we crossed paths again at Syracuse for the 50th anniversary of the military photojournalism program, of which I'm a graduate, and bear the distinction of being the first Black female combat photojournalist in Air Force history. So I thank you for being a part of my path and my journey.
I love it, and to be able to talk with you about the pictures and learn more about you now is a big treat for me, and I know everyone at Nikon is excited to have you, and those of you tuning in, you're in for some great conversations. So let's get started by talking about your career. I love knowing how a photographer got involved in photography in the first place. So when was the first time you picked up a camera, and how do you end up as a combat photographer? And now it's your business. This is what you do.
Well, it's funny. My first camera was a 110 millimeter, but I actually had no desires or inklings about becoming a photographer because I didn't know that was a career path. I went into basic training, open general. I was in Navy Junior ROTC all throughout high school. I knew that I wanted to serve the military and serve my country, but I wasn't exactly sure in what capacity. So on the 16th day of training, they give you these lists of jobs you're supposed to choose from. And I found out that I had been selected for photography. And I remember thinking, photography? That's a hobby. That's not a job. I want to go back home and impress my little small town family. Like I'm a computer, financial, technical, tactical, strategic something or other. Little did I know that photography would not only be the thing that took me around the world, but it put me into situations and circumstances I never would have imagined myself in. And for that, I'm a far richer person.
Mm-hmm. So you get this job through the military of being a journalist or a photojournalist. Are you self-taught? Did you figure it out as you went along? Were there people along the way that mentored you to actually learn the craft of photography?
Yes, we are fortunate to have the most amazing training within the military and specifically in the Air Force. And so my beginning and training in photography in the Air Force was my technical training base was Lowry Air Force Base, Colorado. And I get there and it's the first day of training, and I'm the only person that is in my career field out of my dormitory building. And normally you march as a flight to wherever you're going to go and learn. And so I had to, I show up for formation. They don't know what to do with me. They figure out I need to go way across the base, which I have to walk there. And so, okay, fine. But I get there, of course, I'm late. So I get to my class, knock into the room, and it's a Marine instructor. And I'm immediately like, oh my God, I'm late. I'm here by myself. And then we had very small classes then. So I had, I believe, 7 other Army students that became my classmates, and we began to learn photography together. So it was sketchy at first, like, oh, am I in the right place? But I quickly began to learn that I was in the right place. Initially, I started off in Vandenberg, California, and so I was a lab rat, meaning I processed and printed black and white film all day. And so I felt a bit fraudulent saying that I was a photographer because I wasn't shooting back then. And so I got an opportunity to work for the base newspaper. We loaned photographers to the base newspaper, to the public affairs office. And at the time, Marty Johannick was that photographer, and Marty needed to go on leave, and they asked for volunteers, and I immediately jumped at the chance. And when I did, I ended up being trained and mentored by this amazing tech sergeant, Alfred Wood, I think it's her last name. And I remember her specifically because she would make me go out on jobs over and over again if I didn't get it right. And I was always embarrassed if I had to show up again, but it taught me lessons that stayed with me, not only as a shooter, but as a trainer, as a mentor myself. So fast forward, I get the combat camera, and it is just like, it's the Olympics of photojournalism, you know, of military photojournalism, and the best of the best are there. I mean, you know, Cedric Rudisill, Marvin Preston, Dean Wagner, Rosie Reynolds, Janelle Schroeder. And I'm just like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. And you just see them, you know, it's a revolving door. They're out for a mission. They come back, they download stuff. They're back out the door again. And it just looks so exciting. And then the imagery that they created, oh, I wanted to be a part of that. And I can remember asking some of them, you know, would you teach me? But, you know, it's a fast-paced environment. There's not always time for that. So I did a lot of self-taught, self-training. But it was the feedback of my mentors, most of which I just listed, that really helped me develop and grow. And then I started looking around and I said, wait a minute, I don't see any other Black female combat photojournalists. I want that. I want that. So the first year I submitted, did not get in. And that really did something to me. I really wanted this opportunity. I wanted this training. And so the following year, I worked my behind off. That was the year that I won Military Photographer of the Year illustration category with an image we're going to look at later. I won the most photo contest awards for Military Airlift Command at the time. I got accepted to the DoD Military Photographers Workshop at Fort Meade. And
I
from
remember
there,
that well.
You remember? Yeah, that was an incredible year for me. It was, you know, it was such a struggle at first because I certainly didn't feel as though I was a naturally creative person, and I hadn't given photography any more of a thought than just snapshots of memories that I want to hold on to growing up. And to really find a purpose, and things turned around for me when I got the combat camera, and you saw that what you were doing had a mission and a purpose. You know, base level award support is beautiful in and of itself, but that combat camera mission, ooh, that did it for me. To know that what I saw and what I captured would not only inform our leaders, of course, but one day become the fodder for future history books and discussions. That's meaningful. That's something that nothing can take away. And so I feel incredibly fortunate to be part of this brother sisterhood of combat photojournalism. And it's been a sweet ride. It's been
and winning Military Photographer of the Year, I believe that was 1998. And you share the company of photographers like Stacy Pearsall and Mike Haggerty. I mean, it's really very, very talented people along with yourself. And so that's no simple distinction. That's a great honor to win MilFog, and so happy that you did. I want to now shift over to your pictures, if that's okay with you. And again, thank you for putting together a small collection of work that you have done. And we're going to launch the first picture. And we want to hear the backstories on this. We want to know what you went through. What is this picture about? Why did you choose it as one of the 10 we're going to see today? What does it mean to you? What's it about?
So this image is really special to me because I up until this point, I really struggled to find my visual voice. What kind of photographer was I in a combat photojournalism unit? What does that actually mean? And I saw the work that my colleagues were creating and admired it, but realized I didn't necessarily see quite that way. And I liked illustration and didn't really have much experience with it. And so with this image, I wanted to do something that was evocative, possibly provocative, something to show, you know, when I'm behind the camera, I am just obsessed. I am in a whole nother world. My energy is completely different. And I wanted something that kind of conveyed that. So I'm more enamored with how I did it than the final product, although I do love the final image. But when I did it, it's a two-step process. I first photographed myself on slide film. So I had to, set the camera up, and, I came up with some mannequin head to kind of frame it up how I wanted the final image to look. Shot that image, processed the film, cut out the specific frame that I wanted to use. And then I took the viewfinder off the top of a Nikon F4, put the slice of frame inside of it, put a household light with a parabolic reflector in front of the lens to illuminate the piece of slide frame inside of the camera. And then I photographed the whole setup itself. And I believe that I won that distinction, the Military Photographer of the Year illustration category in 1998, simply because it looks so different than any of the imagery that was there. And so sometimes when you're in a really dense industry, you need to find ways to kind of niche yourself out or make yourself stand out, especially in combat camera where it's the best of the best, right? So you want to distinguish yourself, not so much to separate yourself from others, but just to be clear about what your visual identity and what your visual voice is. And so that's what this image represents to me.
It's beautiful. It's beautifully done, and it's nice the way you've broken it down. And I love it. I mean, the grit and the expression on your face clearly speaks to you as a person, a personality, I guess, as you're saying, with the camera in hand. I don't know if that's different than without the camera in hand, but definitely an energetic shot. Now, was this the type of image you used to get into combat camera as part of your portfolio?
No,
or just I was already in competition? You already were?
This was competition. I was already in. But I had submitted prior to this, and just, maybe an honorable mention here and there, but I just really couldn't find, that moment that really kind of set it off.
Gotcha.
Especially being a combat camera, and not only the level of talent that's there, but what we have access to, creates really amazing imagery. So how do you do that when you're in garrison? And that's what this is about.
Well, I was hoping that you would say that it was your time at the military workshop with people like me and others that inspired you to be better, but I guess I had nothing to do with it. That's okay.
No. Just got started.
So this is another image that you submitted. Talk about this image. What's the backstory here?
Yes. So this is from my tour in Iraq. Stacey and I were here during my first tour in Iraq, and it's really interesting when you think about images from the combat zone, especially when, it's still hot and you're still under attack. You expect to see these really powerful, visually explosive images. But those of us who deploy know that there's a lot of hurry up and wait and a lot of downtime. And I thought it was just as important to document the quieter moments as it is the big bang booms. And this is something like MREs, we live off of this. This is vitally important. We need someone to always be there manning this plane so the MREs can be distributed. And it's not an exciting job. It's really boring. It's long, quiet hours. And I don't know, I found something in this that kind of, I was just walking by it. It just made me stop and look at her and capture this moment, because I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of quiet time in terms of what you experience and see visually.
Yeah, and that's I think it's very common in newspaper photography, journalism in general, especially if you work for a paper where you're not always going to get the cush assignments, or there's not always spot news going on, or there's not something exciting going on, or someone's not always playing in the World Series for you to photograph. So I would think that how do you handle that as a creator? As you say, you walk past this. What are the things that you do to be inspired? What inspires you as a photographer?
My approach to photography, up until recently, I didn't consider myself to be an artistic or creative person. So my approach has always been technique. My trainers, my mentors, my teachers have always really pounded in knowing your fundamentals, that SF, ISO, aperture combination, wins the game. And then you throw in composition and an understanding of light, and you can make anything interesting. Much of what we're going to see later on in today's presentation is simply about that. You have to rely on the basics to get something brilliant, even in the most mundane moments.
Are there any photographers you look up to outside of those that may have trained you early on in the way of inspiration?
You know, it's been interesting. It's so easy to talk about the big heavy hitters, but I've been paying a lot of attention to the lesser known and people that are in my community. So you have people like Jermaine Horton or Kim Roseberry, who is a photographer in Texas, but she started out as a photographer in the studio that I'm now a member of. And I bring her up because when I first moved here and I got on social media and I was looking at, you know, local work, it was hers that really stood out. She had an amazing way of creating iconic images every time she pressed that shutter release button. And I was like, oh my God, I'd love to be able to do that. She shoots men so beautifully, and that's something I'm not very well versed in. And lo and behold, I go to an event. It is in this really interesting space. It's a church, but inside the church, there's all these, you know, little spaces of artistic enclaves, and one of which is the studio space. I walk in and I'm like, I recognize this space. And I ask, I'm like, does Kim Roseberry, does she work here? And they're like, yeah, she's one of our photographers. Fast forward a year later, I became a member of that studio. And so I love our big heavy hitters, but just looking at these people that we don't know much about publicly has been very, very inspiring. The local work that is being generated today is just incredible. And so many of them are self-taught. Mm-hmm. I hate answering these kind of questions because I always forget people. I'm sorry.
You know what? It's okay to forget people because you didn't say Mike Corrado in the no names there, and that's okay. I'm moving on. Moving on. Looks like a very private moment, a very quiet moment. What's happening here?
Yeah, so this is in Iraq also, and it's the end of this airman ship. Security forces. And I actually bring this image up not so much to talk about the image, but kind of the story that happened afterwards. So spent the night with our security forces, documenting what they do, and found out that they were going to do a joint convoy with the Army. And at this time, that was something that wasn't a regular practice, and may have been the first time for this location, I believe. So I heard about it, and I was the team chief, and I was also a PJ. So I brought it back to my team. I didn't want to be selfish. I was like, hey, this is a great opportunity, you know, historical significance, et cetera, et cetera. Offered it up to them. Nobody wanted to, you know, nobody raised their hands. Okay, fine. I will do it. I'll get on the convoy and go. Well, between the time that I had that conversation, the time it was for me to meet up with the convoy, someone spoke with our commander at the time, and I got pulled into his office and got chewed up and down like I've never been chewed out. And what it is that I'm used to going out after a story like a combat cameraman, meaning I hear it, I go out, I find it, I seek, I get it there, I capture it, and I get it put out. I don't necessarily go, mother may I. And not to say that I don't follow the chain of command, but there's just a certain approach to story gathering that wasn't necessarily well received, and maybe not in the way that I did it. But I was so upset. I was like, this is history. We can't miss this story. And that's part of our frustration as military combat photojournalists. There's the things that you can and cannot cover, or the things that you do get to cover. For example, there was an airstrike in our flight line, and I was a photographer that responded, and I'm there. I can touch the aircraft, you know, I'm photographing it, but those images were not allowed to be released. Civilian photographers across the flight line with their long lenses were able to release their images, and I'm happy for them that they got to, but my mission got stifled. And that's a difficult thing to struggle with, especially, you know, back during Desert Storm with all the embedment of civilian journalists. You know, you definitely want them to be able to do their jobs, but it's not at the sacrifice of possibly yours. And not that necessarily they cross, you know, there's all levels of layers in between that. But as a shooter, I was like, I can't believe I can't get my images out, and I can't believe we can't get this great story. So
I can
that was just a
imagine that.
frustration point.
I was going to say, I can imagine that being a big frustration, but let me dig a little bit deeper here. So you get into photography, you go to combat camera, now you're over in Iraq or in other parts of the world. What's going on with you emotionally as you're getting into this? I know you to be a very strong woman, but
Yeah.
but how do your emotions play into this? And like, again, for me, if I would walk into this very first time, I think I'd be like a nervous wreck. I'd be a little, a little crazed in trying to figure it all out. Talk about the emotional and how you handle that.
This particular deployment was one that I was very not nervous, but just very concerned, because I was deploying as a team chief of, I think, a 5 or 6 person team. So I left with the mindset of me and my team are coming back home. If we die, we're dying in our own country. And so with that, as we got into documentation situations, and just in general, they were lobbing mortar fire just blindly on a daily basis there. And, it started to get closer and closer to us. And again, like with photography, I relied on training. I remember this one night specifically where we were walking from our work tents, from our sleep or living tents to our work tents, and we got attacked. And this hit in the living quarter area, and we all had to dive and take cover in a hardened aircraft shelter. And I remember, it's kind of like the movies where it's loud, boom, and you're running, you rush, and then finally, we take cover, we sit and we get in place. And at first, I'm like, oh my God, and then I'm like, wait, okay, get it together. And I'm, then you go right into your training, you check, make sure, your sergeants are okay, your airmen are good, and nobody's physically harmed, damaged, etc. But the impact of that and how it affected me didn't manifest itself until years later. Specifically, we just had the 4th of July, and I can no longer enjoy fireworks because of my time in Iraq, and then also in Sarajevo. And it's been very difficult during the pandemic because people keep launching fireworks and whatnot. So it fills me with a great deal of anxiety. I have an amazing therapist, but I will tell you, my journey to her took a while because I was seeing a therapist at the VA. And I will tell you, if you had asked me prior to all of this, was I affected? Did I have PTSD? I'm like, no, I'm just, we keep it moving. That's what we do. We just keep it moving. We don't process. We just keep it moving. And then when I didn't have time to keep it moving anymore, everything just came back, And so you have the nightmares. You have various triggers. Sometimes there's sounds. Sometimes there's smells. And I was seeing a therapist through the VA, great person, but I remember telling him one day, I am tired of being strong. And he kind of did that cock to his head like a dog when it hears a strange sound. And I knew that this wasn't the therapist for me because he didn't know or have that experience. So I went on Google, Black female prior military therapist. And I found my therapist that I'm with now, who is a whopping 15 minutes from the house. And this person, our first session, I go in, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I'm having difficulty controlling my emotions. I'm not a crier. I cry at times I don't expect to. I'm anxious or scared or maybe even angry, and that's not my personality. And, and then I started to cry, and I was like, I don't do this. I don't know what this is. And she was like, well, shoot, you should cry. You got a lot you're carrying. And there was such a huge relief when she said that, right? Because, you carry yourself, if you're in a leadership position. I got people that are depending on me, so I can't break down. So you stuff everything away. And she just kind of gave me permission to, first of all, acknowledge what I was feeling and why I was feeling these things. And then she gave me great coping mechanisms that I can use and incorporate. So with 4th of July, I used the techniques that she gave me and made it through.
Yeah, that's awesome. And thank you for sharing that, because I think, again, you look at the photos and you don't know what somebody goes through individually. So thank you for sharing those very personal, those personal feelings and emotions. So what do we got going here?
It's a funny image and then not. This is Sarajevo, and this is from my first tour there. And it was interesting coming in. I was part of a two-man combat camera det team, and we're flying in. I swear to God, it was just like the movies. It's the middle of the night. It's storming and raining. We're taking fire, so we're doing combat maneuvers. Here. I'm not a good flyer. Oh, I was so nauseous. Anyway, we land and we get there. Of course, it's night, so you can't really see anything. You get up the next morning. And I remember that first morning, because before you'd watch CNN and they'd always, do their announcements. Hi, this is so-and-so from War Torn, fill in the blank. And that always stuck with me, but I never knew why until I got there. And you get there and you look and you begin to understand what war torn is, where nothing is left untouched by war, right? Whether it's mortar fire or destruction or, people injured or just it hits everywhere. And at the time that we were there, supposedly the war was ending, but you could still hear the sounds of war. And so this one day I'm walking, and we were staying in a Holiday Inn. And I remember this because back in 1984, I remember watching the Olympics, and they were held in Sarajevo. And I remember thinking, like, how ironic that I'm here now as an adult. This is just bananas. And I remember we came up the elevator in the hotel, and one of the doors opened on one floor, and there was nothing there because it had been hit by mortar fire, completely wide open. So again, to convey war torn. So back to this moment, I'm walking to work, and I'm standing at a corner waiting to cross the street. And first I noticed the word, and I'm like, oh wow, welcome to, oof, that's deep. But then I noticed these two guys, and they were kind of hamming it up, and I was like, stop, cheesing for the camera. And then I noticed the walk symbol. And then in that moment, I was like, no matter what the circumstances, life goes on, right? No matter how bad a situation you're in, life goes on. I can remember telling people about, some of my experience as a child growing up in Los Angeles before moving back home to Pensacola, Florida. And people were like, oh my God, how did you get through that? I'm like, you just do. It's not something you're conscious of. And that on that tour, I remember riding with our translator and just kind of learning about the city and their experiences. And I remember saying, just like everyone else does, wow, you're so brave. And she's like, what is this brave? You just do. Horrible accent, but you get the message. But it's a universal truth. I mean, life still goes on in the midst of everything. Here we are, this global pandemic, and life still goes on. Mm-hmm. And it was a really metaphysically moving moment for me that I could be in this combat environment and still have this reminder, this spark. Life still is.
Right. That is their daily life. I mean, that is what they deal with every day. Yeah. And how long were you over there for that tour?
That tour, I think, was probably a 90-dayer back then.
Mm-hmm. Very, very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So let's keep rolling on. I feel like we're in some fine art world here.
Yes. So
is this a point where you're shifting and you're done with the military, and now you have your own business? And so talk a little bit quickly about the retirement, how you left the military and then you started up your own business.
Well, that was interesting because probably the last 7 or 8 years of my career, I was a manager. I was running multiple work centers, so I wasn't only in charge of photographers. And I began to feel like I had fallen out of love with photography. I can't even say it. Mm. And so when I retired, I actually got very sick. I was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and retired, and I moved here. And of all things, I enrolled in grad school in the midst of having a brain tumor because I needed to figure out what the next chapter was going to be if it was not going to be with photography. And in that time, I come to find that photography kept tapping me on the shoulder like, hey, boo, hey, I'm still here. We still go together. And I could not shoot. right? And just like my days in combat camera, I started photographing my friends. And all of my photography before coming here was always done in a small spare bedroom or something or other. You know, I never had my own dedicated studio space. And I just couldn't deny it any longer. So I went ahead and I came up with a name and started photographing clients right here in my living room. And then, like the story I told you, I finally got into a studio space. Mm-hmm. And only recently have I've done a completely different shift, in that March 13th, I made the conscious decision that I was going to create as close to daily as I could. And this was meaningful on several levels. You know, who knew that we would still be self-isolating and quarantining all this time? But I really wanted to shift the way that I see and the way that I was creating. I found that I was doing more creating because my clients requested me to do so. I wasn't creating for my own need to express myself. And I found that because I had been working for clients for so long and had been working for the military for so long, I didn't know what it was I wanted to say visually and photographically. And so, you know, you what is it? I think Warren Buffett says, you know, you invest in what you know, and I know me. And not in a narcissistic way, but my very first series of self-portraits came because I had a cancer scare. And so I naively thought, I'm going to document myself through the whole cancer process. And fortunately, you know, it was all clear, I'm good to go. But I do have a condition called fibromyalgia that has just universally changed my world. My ability to just be, much less create, is greatly limited. I've had to learn how to manage not just the fatigue, but the pain and also the brain fog. And so when I thought about, okay, I do self-portraits. I don't want to just do self-portraits of, ooh, I'm cute, or, you know, what have you, but something that said something. And so with this image, fibromyalgia, try not to curse, just really messes up my world. And I work really hard to stay positive and not give it that kind of control. But when I'm in a flare-up, I'm in pain all over generally. I mean, even now, but when I'm in a flare-up, it really, really affects my arms. So much so that if you're around me, you'll see me, you know, just constantly ringing. And it was someone else that brought it to my attention. And I was like, oh, I gotta create something to speak to this. So this is just one image of a series of looking deeper into what am I trying to say, you know, with my camera.
And how do you set something like this up? I mean, talk a little bit about, you know, the focal length, but how are you making this happen? A little bit of shutter drag. What's going on in the way your setup is
so I'm having fun and playing. And so I shot this with a 60 millimeter macro lens, a one that I've had since the 90s, I think, maybe. And I purposely, I knew that I wanted this gritty kind of look to it, almost like reciprocity failure when you're doing film. And so one of the things that I chose to do was to first defocus it, just so I can get that kind of reciprocity failure look to it, and grain. And so it's available light. It's a very long exposure because I wanted to kind of get that breakup in it. And so everything that I do is in camera. So when I brought it into Lightroom, I just tweaked the contrast and maybe just a touch of clarity, but it is pretty much as shot. Most of what I do is in camera, A, because that's how I was taught, B, probably because I never took the time to learn how to do special effects in Photoshop, because most of them I could do in camera. And I enjoyed that process. It's like putting together a puzzle, you know, it's so much fun. But yeah, so it's during this time period, I've really allowed myself to explore my fine art voice, and I'm really enjoying it.
No, it's beautiful. And in this picture, those of you out there that don't know what fibromyalgia is, it's a very debilitating, painful disease that attacks nerve endings, and it's just not a comfortable thing. So I think this picture represents that really, really well. But now we're on to cracked eggs. What's going on here?
Cracked eggs. So again, making the decision to create a home, I'm self-isolating because of health conditions. So I began to look at the world around me, and I had made breakfast this one morning and actually went to throw these cracked eggshells into the garbage when I happened to notice, oh, look at the texture of that. I never really noticed that. So I immediately ran into the living room, set it up. Again, that 60mm macro lens, and I'm lighting it with a 8200, nice close to the subject matter. And I played with the shadows because I knew I wanted the light to fall in a specific path. And so I'm really pleased with it. I love how you get a little bit of highlight reflection on the eggshell itself from the white side inside of the egg on it. So there was just a lot of things that made me look at it. I'm just really interested in looking at the ordinary, the overlooked, and seeing its beauty. Whether it's composition, texture, lighting, how I approach it photographically. I think it's very important that as a photographer, we really know the rules well so that we can know when and how to break them to create dynamic images. And that's one of the things I really work on.
And I think it's important to say too, it's like, especially maybe a great thing when you're having a creative block is just to start to look at things in your world that you don't typically look at. And I can say this with a lot of honesty and sincerity, that during the pandemic, I started to go through the creative, need. I mean, I wasn't shooting. I was here. I was doing interviews, and didn't realize outside my backyard there were different species of birds. And I love photographing birds. But when you take time to stop for 5 seconds and watch, and you see cardinals and blue jays and crackles or grackles and a number of different, it's like, wait a minute, I got a lot of stuff that I could be doing out here. So I understand that. I mean, it's something that kind of keeps you motivated and moving on. Now, you're looking at this as your creative side, but Simply Z Imagery, the business that you're running, when you say you have clients, would you consider yourself more of a portrait photographer then? Are you doing portraits? What kind of work are you doing with your business?
So with my business, Simply Z Imagery, I'm primarily a portrait photographer, but I do have branding clients. And actually, I do a little website building and development as well, but primarily photography, primarily portraits. I have an affinity for small business owners, entrepreneurs, those dream chasers, those passion pursuers. I have a desire to want to help them meet and engage with their ideal client and help flesh out their dreams and bring them to fruition. So that's something that brings me great joy photographically.
No, it's amazing you bring that up, because now more than ever, small businesses need our help. And everything from my barber to a local deli, a lot of them were closed for quite a while. So, but I love this. I mean, it's a beautiful fine art twist. And now looks like we're back to a viewfinder. And
it is.
Talk about this picture. Talk about the creative behind this. What's your inspiration?
So again, looking around my home, I have a small collection of vintage cameras, and so I chosen one, and I originally chosen it for it to be the subject. And, so I put it in place, and I'm getting ready to set it up. And I happened to walk past and look down and look through the viewfinder. And I loved how it was so gritty and kind of dirty. And then I was like, oh, I want to shoot something through it. So I had this one onion. I'm notorious for letting produce become another life form. So it had sprouted, and I like the way that it sprouted, and that's really what drove it. But just really getting myself not only to see more in a fine art way, but to create fine art looks and appeals and feel in camera has been my goal with this project. And so again, in fact, I'm pretty certain that this was the 60mm again. And it's not the only lens I shoot with, but it seems to be the one that I shot with the most of these images. Mm-hmm. But just really enjoying exploring and playing it. And I like repurposing things for, finding different ways to use things other than they were intended to. Hence the definition of repurposing. But I find it fun. It's fun. One of the things, that I love about photography, Mike, is that it requires you to be able to troubleshoot. It's easy to do a shoot, to do an assignment when everything goes right. The lighting's right, your subject's right, and your camera's good, and blah, blah, blah. But what do you do when it all goes wrong? You know,
Yeah.
it's like when they taught us equivalent exposure. I took that to heart, like, oh my God, my light meter could die? I need to know this. But
Listen, you were killing me before when you brought up reciprocity. I haven't heard that term in forever. But I mean,
yeah,
this is amazing. It's funny because there's so many things I buy because I say I'm going to go be healthy, and by the time I find them in the refrigerator, like 3 months later, you're right, they take on another
oh,
form. But while
yes.
you mentioned lenses, just to step back a little bit, journalistically, what would you say your go-to lenses were when you were working as a journalist?
Oh, 70 to 200. I personally like the 85. That was actually my personal lens I used to take with me. And then 18 to 50.
Got it.
14, 18 to 50.
Beautiful. Well, just wanted to address that since we brought up lenses. I didn't want to think you just only shot with a 60 mil, like you said.
I don't.
But this is great. I mean, I'm loving I'm loving the artwork here. I'm loving what you're doing. I love the creative. Talk about your inspiration behind this image.
Well, you know, love flowers. And I had a bouquet of flowers that had this one really interesting purple poofy flower I'd never seen before. And I looked at it and I was like, I think I could do something with that. I had some construction paper from another project that I was doing. And I actually lit and gelled the construction paper to a different color. And I lit the flower itself too, to kind of change its shade of purple and vibrance. And then ultimately, I did zooming. I love zooming. I zoom with my portraits. I zoom with my stationary objects. I love zooming and seeing how, you know, especially the longer your exposure, how the zooming changes the overall look of the image.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what this is. And what's interesting is I remember this day specifically because I was having a series of really bad flare-up days, and I had been sleeping a lot. And I remember I kept seeing that flower in my head, and I was drawn, compelled to create this image. So I get out of bed, I create it in the middle of the night, and there we go.
See, that's amazing because you think, you know, when you're getting hit with fibromyalgia and an attack, that's the last thing you'd want to do is create, but you're actually using it as a vehicle to kind of keep yourself going.
Yes. What I have found is because fibromyalgia limits me from doing so much of what I used to do. I found that two things are it's very clear to me that there are two things that are most important in my life, and that is photography and that is fitness. And if I can do one or both of those things, despite how bad the flare-ups are, I can survive it. I can stay sane. And so that's been my whole driving force. You know, of course with fibromyalgia, but especially with this pandemic and me self-isolating and being at home and at times spending so much time by myself that I forget to talk to people. These are my coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. I think that's beautiful, and thank you again for sharing that because, you know, it's not easy to talk about yourself personally in these types of environments. So that's very appreciated as we roll on. I know we have a couple more images to talk about. I absolutely love this picture. And it's so simple, but obviously it came from a creative place in your heart and your world. So talk about this picture a little bit and the backstory behind it.
Okay, this is a fun one, but meaningful one. So of course we're all self-isolating and everything's closed, or at least was back then. And I needed to shave my head. And I have the most wonderful barber, Mike the Barber on Instagram, and couldn't get to him, of course. So I had to shave my head for the first time. And so, you know, there I am in the mirror, and I'm like, okay, look, ain't nothing to it but to do it. So I'm like, and I'm watching the hair just kind of fall to my counter, and I noticed, I was like, oh, I like the way it looks. Like it came out in sheets. And it was soft and it was pliable and you know, in our community there's the conversation between having natural hair or chemically processed hair. I've always had chemically processed hair because that was what was given to me, but I have always loved my natural hair. So when I retired, I did what we culturally call the big chop. I cut off all my chemically processed hair, rocked my teeny weeny afro, and now I have locks. And this image is my homage to my love of my hair, my culture, and my community. And it just seemed only right to put it with the Afro pick, Black Fist, to kind of illustrate and explain that point.
And so this just comes to you when you're shaving your head in a moment, and you come up with this idea. That's fascinating. It's funny because I think a lot of people can associate with not being able to get their hair cut during the pandemic. And listen, no hero here, but when I went back to the barber, I called him, and he must have had his cell phone set up, and he says, "Oh, we're not open yet, and we're waiting, maybe next week." So they did open that week, and I gave him $100 to do a haircut because I calculated like 3 or 4 haircuts that I wouldn't have had to help the business along. But it was like I was renewed with the new haircut. And I ask our director Brian all the time how my hair looks in this kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I think that's fascinating. And again, it's a simple approach. I love it. Are you on a light table here? I mean, how are you getting the stark white background? So that's how that was done.
I'm on a light table. I love
very cool. So we've got one more image that we can talk about of this beautiful woman. Who is this?
That would be me. That would be me. I have been submitting this as my bio photo, which it violates all the rules for a headshot. But I think a headshot, given the right circumstances, should speak to who you are. And I am anything but traditional. I love my profile. I'm enjoying my look, playing with my locks. I think this is a great way to kind of speak to who I am. And then the fact that, exposure-wise, you can still see the camera around my neck was what really made me very happy about that. And this is cool because this was at the end of a photo session in my studio space in the West End. And I was talking to my client about creating beautiful images with your cell phone. This is a cell phone image. And I showed her how to manipulate her cell phone, her camera phone, so that she could create images the way that she saw them in her head. Because we were talking about it, and she's very artistic. And I was like, yeah, you could do that. And in that moment, I was like, watch, I'm gonna take a picture of me and watch what I do with it. And so that was it. But yeah, this is more me than any other standard kind of headshot, you know.
And you do a lot of self-portraits. I've seen them online of your work. And
I do.
Those of you. What is your handle on Instagram? Is it Simply Z Imagery? Simply Z Imagery.
That's Z with 2 E's.
And where can people look at your work otherwise? Your website, is it Simply Z as well? Just keep searching Simply Z. Very cool.
Instagram, website, the whole 9.
Very cool. Well, let me back out of this and bring you back full screen. Some remarkable images, but people definitely check out Lisa's Instagram page and some of the other work she's done. Talk a little bit about your business now, though, and how things are flowing, how you're working yourself back into getting your clients going. And I mean, are you gonna do anything with this fine art work? Are you gonna run galleries? Are you gonna what's going on with the work that you showed us and some of the stuff in the past?
So this has been an interesting time. When this began, and it really got to get serious in terms of how long we were going to have to stay home, I was like, okay, well, I had my very first workshop scheduled that I had to cancel, and I had some portrait clients and a couple branding clients that we've had to cancel, postpone, what have you. How do I navigate this? And then I didn't expect to have so much anxiety around the pandemic, and not so much the virus, but people not complying. And so I'm like, I'll just stay home. And originally, I started creating these images just as a means of expression, therapy, and just to have fun. But now I have actually gotten serious and said, I have been talking about wanting to venture into fine art. This will be my springboard to do so. So in the very near future, I'll be launching a new website and creating a line of fine art wall decor is the direction that I'm going. I am still trying to answer the question of my portrait clients. How can I support them and make sure that we both feel comfortable and safe in doing so. I don't quite have that answered, except that, you know, obviously I won't be shooting in the studio. I'll be photographing, you know, on location, and we'll just kind of see how that goes. But definitely, yeah, new beginning for fine art.
Well,
even come.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just saying I've even come up with a name, and it's going to be Amplified Whispers Fine Art Photography.
Ah, that's beautiful. So you know, Mr. Hackman and Mr. Cook will be listening in, right? So if we don't bring them up again, since I brought them up earlier, the two Kens that when we first met at the military workshop, those are the two that got it together with Mike Edrington, and great workshop. And you've come such a long way since then, and it's so nice to be back with you. Do you miss combat photography at all?
Greatly. I was fortunate enough to not only attend the Combat Camera annual reunion last year, but I actually got to be one of the mentors during the annual workshop, and just seeing what these men and women are doing is just unbelievable. They're so talented, and they're so talented so soon in their careers. It's just exciting. And you know, I think if I were still in Charleston, I'd definitely still be working or volunteering or training with them, because it's just exciting to see and watch them grow and take off. I'm watching my troops now retire, and it's exciting. But I forgot what the original question is. I'm going off on a tangent. Help me out.
No, just you answered it. I asked if you missed military photography, combat photography, and certainly there's a family that grows there. And my experiences with the military, from the first aircraft carrier I was ever on, of the 8 that I went on, and the workshops that I did, the military goes deep into technical and training. So there's nothing missed in learning the fundamentals, and that's one of the things I always really appreciated about going into those environments and working with those photographers. And of course, if we mention the Hackmans, we have to mention Russ Egner, who was with the Navy and part of Naval Media Services, and Chris Madden, some really great people along the way. I know. It's like memory lane here. Memory lane.
And not only that, but they infuse me with their love and their passion for this, that I have to give it away, right? You like, this isn't ours to keep. We have to give this away because it was so freely given to us. And you know, I'm emotional when I think about the Kens and everyone that made this possible, because my life would be what it is without them.
Yeah.
You know?
And they put it together right. They got great people together to teach, that love to teach, and best workshops ever. So Lisa, thank you so much for putting the pictures together and giving us insight. And again, to share some of your personal world, we appreciate that too. It gives us some great insight as to the way you're working and what you're doing. And we're going to, of course, continue to meet up and have some great times moving forward. So thank you for putting together this collection of images. Those of you tuning in, again, a really nice hour with Lisa. And check out her work, Simply Z Imagery, on Instagram and her website. If you want to, go back to nikonusa.com/Creators Hour. You go back and rewatch any of the interviews we've done, look at some videos on tips on how to create pictures, challenges that we've had. But by all means, everybody get out there, create your images, share them with us if you can, and be safe out there. So for Nikon, I am Mike Corrado. Thank you for joining us, and everybody out there, be safe.